Hello, everyone. This is Lee Andrews from Akathame. Thank you again for joining me with Live with Lee. And our guest today is James Rozanski. And I pronounced that correctly, correct?
Yes, 100%.
Yes. Beautiful. And the reason I asked James to join me on a broadcast is because he comes from a school that everyone would say, wow, you know, they would be impressed with his educational background. They would be impressed with his work background. And yet he's in the same boat as many of us, trying to decide and manage his career path. So we're going to talk to him about where he came, you know, how he got into design, how you've already got somebody who loves you. So Maria. I don't even want to try to pronounce Maria's last name, but Maria is Maria.
Hi, Maria. Love you.
And apparently you know each other. All right. So I want to understand on a greater level what is happening within the graphics design and communications space. I know very well what's happening in the user experience and digital design, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about the hardcore function of design itself, the graphic design, the communications behind it, and why people are choosing to go for advanced degrees, especially in the area that James is going to tell us about. So James, let's start first things first, if you don't mind. Tell me why did you get into media and communications as an undergrad? And then tell us about the graduate program that you just completed through Parsons.
Yeah, so I was in media, culture, and communications at NYU. And I mean, honestly, like, I don't think anyone should have to choose their career that young. It was kind of just the thing that made the most sense at the time. And I think NYU is a very theory-based school, or at least that program was. And so in terms of getting actionable job skills, I kind of had to teach things to myself. So when I was in high school, I started to play around with the Adobe Suite. And I used to have bad skin when I was a kid. So I would play around, Photoshop my pictures, not knowing that one day you could get paid for that. And so it was kind of those things that I was doing on the side that led me into the path that I was going into today. And so over the past 10 years, I was doing a lot of design and kind of worked my way up through various creative departments, marketing departments. But I always knew I wanted to get a higher ed advanced degree and go back and get my master's. And so because you needed to teach. And I don't know where that came from. That was always the plan all along. I didn't know when I was going to do it or how I was going to do it, but I always wanted to go back because you need one to teach in a lot of schools here. One of my professors at NYU actually, she was the gallery director at Milk Studios where I was working, and she taught obviously our program, and she taught at Parsons too. And so once I saw her doing that, I was like, damn, I want to do that. Like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an educator. I'm going to have my professional career. And so at the point where I decided to go back to school finally, I was like, if I don't do it now, it's kind of at a bit of a crossroads. And I was like, if I don't do it now, I don't know when the hell I'm going to do it. There's never going to be like a good time to go back and do this. So originally the program was kind of up in the air. I didn't know I was going to do it. I applied to basically MFA programs in design because that's what I knew. And then some were more on the business side, which is what I ended up choosing at Parsons, which is strategic design and management, which I call kind of like an MBA for designers, basically, because it has all the business stuff, but it also has the creative stuff. And I did that because I was always very practical in terms of being at a creative department, because people kind of go and skew a lot of times and kind of the up in the air 30,000 feet stuff. And I was looking to get more into the more practical side of things because I always got along very well with marketing and sales. And I don't know if a lot of creative can say the same thing. And so I figured that there was something in the business sphere that I needed to explore further. And so the program, like I was saying, is very, very entrepreneurial focused. I had started my agency along at the same time, so that kind of drew me in that direction. And it helped me connect business and creativity in a way.
So wait a minute, you just threw something out there. So you were working full-time in your own business while going to school full-time? Or was that part-time at school?
Oh, full-time, baby. Everything was full-time. And then I started to teach in this last semester. So I was teaching a class, I was working full-time, and I was going to school full-time. And now it's over. Thank God.
Yeah. I would be curled up in a fetal position if somebody
Oh my
told me.
God. I felt like that most of the time. Yeah.
I'm just curious, how much sleep did you get while you were going through this process?
Well, I was a little bit older than some of the people that were in there, so I, would make it a priority. That's for sure. But over time, I mean, you get to feel, you understand your limits a little bit more. I think that was the big thing that I took out of the past 2 years is now I know my limits and would not go past them again.
Yeah. But you were on a mission. I think that when you're on a mission like you are, the time doesn't even come into an account. That's your priority and you set out to do it. And I think that's really critical as part of career planning. One thing I do want to ask you is, do you think it's important if you're going to teach design or teach anything, especially design though, do you think it's important that you have actual practical experience, or what are your thoughts about people teaching without any practical experience in that practice?
I think it's valuable. I think that that's what I can say a lot about Parsons. It's like actual practitioners of their craft, and then they bring in that parallel experience. I think that's where you get the divergence between a theory and actual putting things on paper. Yes. And I think even going back to get a degree, like I would encourage anyone who wants to get further education to go and work in a professional, like to be a professional in that space for a while, because it completely changes your perspective on the way that you educate and the way that you run your career. Like even the process of applying or even the process of doing anything, I felt like I had a story to tell. And now I feel like I have a story to tell my students, whereas before, especially as an undergrad, I was like, what am I doing? Like, this seems okay. But if I'm going to spend $60,000 again, I want to know that it's applicable.
Yeah, especially if you're going to be spending $60,000, right? So let's talk about some of the challenges. What are the nuances between working for somebody else inside an organization and working for yourself? What are the nuances and what are the challenges of each that you encountered? Many of the people who are going to be watching this, James, are in the beginning stages of defining their career and how to pursue their dreams. So whatever you can shed a light on those areas would be great.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is that I never thought about owning my own business, ever. Like it never crossed my mind. It was never a thing. And I feel like a lot of times in life, things just come across your plate and you're like, okay, I'm going to do that. And that was exactly what happened. I think I never had a problem with working for other people. I was happy at every place. I loved every place that I've ever been at. The major difference is like, let's say you worked at an agency versus owning your own agency. The major difference for me was, let's say you're working in an agency, you're doing the work, maybe you're getting a budget, you're giving one and you're going on pitches, versus literally having to look at a profit and loss statement. Like that is the major difference and something I had never, ever had to do in my life. I used to say that I was protected from capitalism a little bit, especially being in like the creative sphere, because you're never, at least when you're like early on in your career, you're never asked to define why you're an asset. You know what I mean? As opposed to like, if I was a salesperson, you can see in hard and fast numbers if I'm doing my job correctly. But for creative, it was never like that. And so kind of advancing that further, it changes the way that you look at things when you're looking at a spreadsheet and you're seeing the dollars and cents. And I think that has completely flipped the way that I do business, or the way that I look at things now, wanting to go back into more of that creative role and not so much the business development, because everything is tied to money. Like that's why businesses exist. And so you're never fully protected from that. Like that's the reason that you're there. And I think the more that you can tie things in, because creative doesn't always have to do this, the more that you can tie it into sales and why this business is successful, the better off you'll be. And I wish I knew that earlier, but I'm glad I know now.
So when I teach the storytelling, which that's a big thing that I focus on, is that the designers who go into leadership roles or management roles are those who can tie what they do to increase revenue, improve brand, and improve efficiencies. Those three primary things. Of course, there's other things that fall under it. So you're a professor now. You are teaching are you teaching undergraduate or graduate level? Or both?
Yeah, they're undergrads. They're seniors and sophomores.
Undergrads. Okay. So how is it that we can better prepare ourselves as designers? Because not every school teaches that business component. In fact, I haven't found one school that has that teaches it from the graduates that I've spoken to. So what is it that these guys as designers need to prepare themselves for? How are they going to get that information when they're sitting at a desk and they're being handed a folder of information or a packet and say, design this, make it look pretty? What would you do if you were sitting in that seat and somebody said, here, James, design this and make it look good?
Yeah, and that's what they're doing, especially when they're first starting out. I think I tell my students I'm jealous of them because if I wish I could go back and get that knowledge when I was first starting out 10 years ago, because I feel like it would have changed my trajectory. I can only imagine if someone came and interviewed with me and they were talking like that, I would be like, holy, like, who is that? But I think what I can say is, like, at least from the creative department, from my perspective, it's like the creatives are always at the end because they're making the actual things. And I think the earlier that you can get involved and ask for reach assignments or get involved, especially in the marketing department, because that's usually where you get your insights from, who are then talking to sales and all of that kind of stuff. I think the earlier you can get involved in that stuff, the better, because you'll understand why you're doing what you're doing. It's no longer, does this look good? Does it sound good? Is it cute? Do people think it, like, it's so much bigger than that. And the sooner that you can start to tie, what I actually think of it in levels. You have the business objectives up at the top. I'm like trying to center this. You have the business objectives up at the top, then you have marketing objectives, and then you have creative objectives. So the sooner that you can create that line for yourself, you're just going to be set.
So you're saying business objectives, and this is what a designer should understand, right?
Yeah.
And
whatever. The business objectives, marketing objectives, and a designer's objectives, let's say. Because you can design anything. Like, I used to do a lot of retail. You could design a website. You can design a product. You can design anything.
So if people are new, they're coming out of college, or even those who stayed in college to complete their undergrad and their graduate all at once, they have very limited portfolios and very limited experience to fall back on. What are the questions that they should be asking, regardless of experience, when they get their requirements, right? They're being handed this packet. What questions should we be asking?
I would say, why? Why am I doing this? Is the cornerstone of everything, I think, because especially when you're first starting out, you're not being asked to determine the why. A lot of times that's left up to leadership, and especially things that I do now. Strategy is like a buzzword for me, but it's about the strategy of it, like behind everything that you do. So I think once you start to be involved and have a seat at that table and you're understanding why you're designing what you're designing, that's when you start to get you start to understand the system better. And that's exactly how you grow. And I think especially, at least in terms of my path, it was like the earlier I could get involved in projects, it churns from execution and ideation. So, and that's kind of what, you get paid to do at a leadership level, is to think about things and actually, put pen to paper. So I think when you're understanding the why in the beginning, that's like number one for me.
So let's put you back in the owner of your agency role, right? And I know how much you love to read P&Ls. So when you were, you had a team of 8 people, is that right?
Yeah.
You had 8 people on your team. So, and of course, right now, every single dog in my neighborhood has decided to congregate under my window and start.
Hello.
I apologize, but know that I'm very well protected. So let me ask the question quickly. So how did you screen for candidates? What was your hiring process? What did you look for in resumes, portfolios? Where did you find these people? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I think, what's funny is I feel like you were saying earlier, in terms of not having applicable experience for work, like especially if you're first coming out of that, you only really have schoolwork and things that you kind of come up with in your mind. That doesn't bother me. I just want to see good work. And I want to see your thought process. And this is another thing that I tell my students is like, and this is what they learn now because I'm teaching the bachelor's version of the program that I took. And so what they know now is exactly also what I was just saying in terms of the why. I want to understand your process, because a lot of people just show the end result, and that's not really what it's about, because there's so much more that it takes to get to that space. So I want to know how you work. I want to know what you're thinking about. I want to know the why of why you're doing what you're doing and how you do it differently than other people. So I think that's one thing related directly to the actual work. And then also for me, and this is important even for like, as I go back and explore other jobs and other companies, like I'm a big culture person. And I think the best thing for me was translating like what Rain's, the agency's culture codes exactly were and who fit what those were. And number one is levity. Like I feel like energy is the most important thing ever. And that's what I kind of look for. That's my number one, regardless. Like, do I like you? Do I want to work with you every day?
Yeah. And it's true that energy is very important. So I want to talk about pricing now, because I get a lot of candidates who are questioning whether or not to be represented by a staffing firm, so because they're always very concerned about the markups and all that stuff. On any given day, what kind of markup did you use in your agency to get the work done? Why, and from a business standpoint, why was that markup needed?
My rule of thumb, and I don't remember where I ever saw this, is like ×3. Everything, like charge ×3. Yeah. And I literally could not tell you where I wrote that.
300% markup.
Yeah.
On the people that are working with you ×3. Now,
yes.
What goes into that ×3?
It's interesting because you'll find that agencies fluctuate wildly. And I remember when we were first doing our competitive research and like reaching out and looking for people that were in the space and what they were charging. I mean, the numbers were absolutely bonkers. And like, you know, when you're doing the work, especially because I was a freelancer and I still freelance all the time. And the markup is absolutely insane. And there's no rhyme or reason for it. You know what I mean? It's just, that's the cost of doing business and what you put in your bank. And so you'll find agencies, I mean, we were a startup, like it was only 2 years old at the point where it no longer became a thing. But the agencies that have been around for a long time, like they have the brand recognition, obviously they have the name behind them, and they're allowed to charge even more than what we were even charging. And so, like I said, I don't even know if there's a rhyme or reason to it besides looking at your margins and figuring out what you actually need to be doing business.
I think that is the rhyme and reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, how much money do I want to make?
That's right. It's not, yes, it's how much money do you want to make as a person, yeah, but how much money do you need to run that business? So, and I stress this over and over again, don't ever worry about what the company is charging. Always focus on what you're making. If you're happy with what you're making, that's all that counts. Then it's up to the company to figure out how to maintain a competitive advantage and value within their space. So I can't believe this. We are, at 20 minutes. We've only got 10 minutes left.
Oh my gosh.
15 questions to go. So you have also been a creative director, right? And so tell me what is it like to be a creative director inside a large organization, because you've worked at some name brand organizations and some agencies, but you also said that you had a great reputation with salespeople and marketing people. How did you get that? Because that's really key, I think, for designers to expand within the enterprise, not just stay in that design team. Does that make sense? Yeah. So tell me what that looks like. And also tell me, as that creative leader, how did you encourage the people that were on your team to network and meet the clients, if you did at all? Yeah,
I think, so the first time I worked at a hair company called Diva Curl, and that was really the first time that I understood how important working cross-functionally is. And that's, 100% for me is working cross-functionally. And actually, I feel like this is my point of difference now as a creative director and as just somebody in the workforce, is establishing that link with other people in other departments. It is so key. It's in your best interest to be friendly with everyone and work with them and understand what they do. And it's not that you have to it's not that you have to do that work, but for me, understanding what other people do made me better at what I did, because I understood their pain points, I understand what made them happy, I understand the business objectives behind that and where my role fit into it. So I think when you do that, when you put yourself out there, and that's kind of being visible in the culture of the organization, and it kind of depends on how people work together in that company too, because there's a lot of politics that could sometimes be involved. But I think the sooner that you do that, the more you'll understand. And I think for me, at least for the people that are on my staff, it's kind of like, that's a stretch assignment in terms of developing those soft skills, because that's not necessarily a hard skill either, talking and being friends with other people and working with them in a good way, in a productive way. And so I think that's always my objective, because I think my career really took off after I understood that. And that's what I want people to understand when they work for me.
So your career the shifting point was when you started to understand the person and what was at stake for them within the confines of the organization. In other words, what was their job being, what are they being held accountable for, and how did it impact the organization? Once you understood,
right.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, and I think I remember Joe saying things about empathy yesterday.
Yes.
And I think that is key because honestly, I mean, oh, okay, good.
We're going to talk about
yeah.
Hold that thought, because there's one other question that I want to ask you while we're on the subject of you being a creative director. So as a creative director, you know that, and as a designer, you know that I want to say our people, but I wish I had the talent that you had and the other people that I represented have. But your craft and your skills and your capabilities are so unique, which means that you're personally vested, right, in the work that you do. And so when people come back to critique you on it, and the business leader who has absolutely no design skills or capabilities or understanding whatsoever comes back and says, no, I still want it blue, or I still want it black, how do you emotionally prepare yourself for that? And then how do you try to either counsel that client, and I call them all internal clients, customers, or do you just, and when do you know to fold your hand and say, okay, whatever you want, you're going down this ditch, good luck?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Creative is subjective, to be perfectly honest. And I think you can kind of go so far. And this is also what I learned over the years too, is that, if someone wants me to change a word, a color, that's not necessarily coming from a place of style. Like, it's just what they want, because again, they're the client or the customer or my boss or anything. And so I remember a specific moment in time where I switched from taking it personally, because also it's not personal, it's just preference, to be honest, at a certain point, and switching it, because I think in the creative realm, you're 100% right that people they're completely invested in what they do, and it is personal. And especially when you put stuff into the creative space, art, design, what have you, whatever, you're thinking that it's part of you, because it's all these skills and all these talents coming out through your work. But this is also why I don't judge portfolios super harshly, because I know how many people are involved. If you had a portfolio, it's because, again, this is why I focus so much on process, because when I'm seeing a final deliverable, I have no idea how many people touched that thing or gave their opinion. If you had a portfolio of things that you did, and a lot of schoolwork is like that, that's 100% you. And maybe some critiques that you got from the people that you asked for. It's not, it's not being put on a shelf. It's not being put to market. So I'm getting kind of 100% you in that scenario. But, when I put stuff on a shelf in Sephora and it's been worked over for a year, it's completely different than something I had started with. So once you separate yourself from looking at things personally, I think that it gives you a lot of power. I think it makes you easier to work with. And I think there's a fine line that you can draw between totally being here, whatever you want, and just saying, hey, I have expertise in XYZ. Here's my advice about this. Take it or leave it.
I'd like to frame that. I don't put too much emphasis on a portfolio because I don't know how many people touched it. That just blows everything everybody said about a portfolio right out of the water.
I know. I teach a portfolio class, so I'm sorry.
And you teach a portfolio class. So what are you teaching them in this portfolio class?
It's I'm like, don't take my class. No, I think it's
for this very reason they need to take this class.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that you do, and I think it's about storytelling. I think it's 100% who are you, what value do you bring to the organization, how do you do that? Not show me this final deliverable, do I like what it looks like, and do I like what it says? Because I think everyone is coming from a different place, and something that I like, someone else may hate, and vice versa. So I think that's why I really, really encourage them. And they're not all designers. Some of them, someone wanted to go back to law school, all that stuff. I think that something that everyone has in common is explaining what they do and how they do it and who they are. So that is something I push, the process, not necessarily the final.
Interesting. So people are taking your class that aren't even designers? Is that what I'm hearing, the portfolio class?
Yeah, the group of kids, so strategic design and management, when I was in, they weren't all designers either. Like there were people that came from business, there were people that own businesses, there were people that are straight up design, they do graphic design, they do UX design. It was a conglomerate of random things. And the bachelor's version is actually the same thing. And the good thing about that program in particular is that even if you don't know what you want to do, they're transferable skills in anything.
What I'm hearing, and it makes my heart kind of sing, is that everybody understands that designers design the world, regardless of what part of the world you're focused on, whether it's, marketing, creative, whether it's finance or anything. Design is part of everything, isn't it? We have to think about what we create, and that is a design process.
Yeah, and I think the major shift too is that people, I mean, historically, businesses will say, hey, we have this idea, you're going to want this. I think now it's the flip to the human-centered kind of area of focus, and that's where design comes in. I think design is a little buzzwordy right now, and design thinking and all that stuff, but it's really just a way of doing things, and it's understanding the consumer as opposed to just forcing an idea or a service or a product down their throat. It's kind of flipping it around, and it's being like, do you actually need this, and what do you need?
Nice. That's brilliant. And this is why we have Parsons, right? This is why we go
exactly. Exactly.
We've got 4 minutes left, so I think we're actually about 3 minutes.
Oh no.
I'm actually going to have 2 people on next week to talk about this in great detail, the theory and the science behind empathy. Do you think empathy can be taught?
Yeah. You know what? I remember a couple of years ago I had a group of conversations about this, because I would not have considered myself empathetic a while ago. And the more that you talk about it, I think it's not necessarily being emotional. It's just putting yourself in other people's shoes. And I think that's part of the research that I was just talking about in the design thinking process, is that's exactly what you're doing. You're learning how to empathize with other people, and you're learning, because not everyone, especially in the climate, especially everything that's been happening the past couple of weeks and months, there's no way for you to know other people's stories unless you ask and listen. So it's not even teaching empathy necessarily. It's kind of teaching those skills of asking and listening and doing your research and due diligence, in my opinion. So do you want to do it or not?
So let me pose the question that many designers ask me, and of course, I have a response for it, so I would love to hear your response. Yeah. So a designer came to me and said, how can I get this business owner to change their mind and see my point of view that what they're suggesting is bad design? If I know their business and I'm empathizing with what they need to accomplish, and I, as the professional designer in the room, am telling them that this is the best way to go, I've provided them with all the stats, right? And still, they are not empathizing with me as the designer, or acknowledging the fact that I come to the table with this expert level knowledge. What would you say to them?
I mean, I personally think it's a two-way street, and what do you care? You'll find other people that work well with you. I think that there's the phrase is lost on me now, but there's someone for everyone, in my opinion. And I think that if you're working with people like that, you're not working with the right clients for you.
Love it. And so that's what I say. I say either give them what they want and accept it, or walk away. What is your walk away? What is your walk away point, James? When do you stop working with a client?
When it's painful for me. It's not no one needs to do anything. You know what I mean? There's no necessity necessarily in anything that anyone does. And this is the practical side of me coming out again. It's I always feel like if something is wrong in my life, I change it. And that's just always what I've done, which is why I have worked in so many different companies. I've done so many things, and I've been able to advance so quickly now that I'm coming into my 30s, is because if I want something, I feel I'm so 100% of the proponent that if you don't ask, you don't get.
There you go.
And vice versa. It's if you want to change something, you have the ability to change it. Go do it.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And how refreshing. So, James, I think it's very cool where you're at right now. And Randolph, who has said every professor needs to be like you, and he's one of our viewers. And he's also asking what's next for your career, which is the last question of this half-hour stint. What is next for you? Tell everybody what you're doing right now. It's actually quite cool. Gutsy.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So I'm helping friends launch their businesses right now. Because I mean, again, and everyone has been affected like this. I've been on this exact couch for the past 3 months, and there's only so much you can do. But I think I have been helping people who want to start their business because I realized I had a little bit of entrepreneur fatigue. Not to say that I would never start something myself ever again, but I think I know for the next couple of years, I would love to settle down in-house somewhere and create impact in that way. I'm still going to continue to teach. Honestly, if you're having ideas about teaching, go do it because it's the most fun thing that I have ever done. And I'm so glad that I've been having this idea for 10 years and I didn't hate it because that would have ended me. But I'm loving that, continuing that. But I think I am looking now I feel like I have divergent paths in my career. I have one that's becoming an educator and giving back. I feel like like I said, I have a story to tell other people now. And I want to keep going. I want to see how far I can go in this creative field. I think that I have a lot more to do. So I'm excited.
So you're looking, are you looking for other full-time jobs? Or are you going to stay focused on looking to support small businesses? Because that's your own business. Yeah,
you're right. I'm going to go full-time again. I think what I realized also is that I'm a little risk averse. Like when I think back to when I'm in Vegas, I don't even gamble. Like I just walk through the casinos with like a martini in my hand. I like to be visible in the culture, visible in the company, and doing cool stuff. And I think when I get back into that, when the economy starts to open up again and I get the opportunity to do that, like I'm very excited for that moment because I know it's coming.
Well, leaving it on that note, James, thank you so much for spending this very fast half hour with us.
So fast.
Come back again and talk about some of the things that you mentioned on a deeper dive. Again, everyone who's attended and watching post-recording, thank you so much for joining me at Live with Lee. More to come.
Thank you.